Welcome to Rebel Speak and Be Encouraged. And I am reading today from a little bit of Isaiah 65 because I'm finishing up this week a trek through the book of Isaiah and the beauty of that book and the familiarity of the best bits of that book. I used to say to people in my childhood, I knew the Psalms, I knew the Gospels, and I knew the best bits of Isaiah. That was kind of, I was afraid of Paul because I read Paul wrong. Anyway, I'm just going to read the first few verses here. This is chapter 65, and God's in the midst of differentiating how God is going to be working with those that seek him and those that don't. That God's no longer working with Israel in its totality, but God's moving and kind of shifting God's storyline into one of relationship and relational fulfillment. And he says this, Lord, Yahweh says, people who never before inquired about me are now asking about me. And in chapter 64, the chapter just before this, the people are saying, God, where are you? And they're very frustrated, but they're inquiring of God because they're saying, God, where are you? They're not saying, okay, we're leaving God and we're going to other gods. And in that inquiry, God says, no, to that inquiry, I am a God who responds. I am a God who responds quickly. As your heart and your mind move towards me and say, where are you? I move towards you. People who never before inquired about me are now asking about me. I am being found by people who are not looking for me. To them, I have said, I am here. I am here. I am here. And I believe that right now, just within the globe, the global landscape, folk are inquiring. Things are what they are, and there's a turning to God and an inquiring of God. And as folk do that, as they turn to Yahweh, God says, I'm here. I'm here. I'm moving. I'm purposing. I'm fellowshipping with you. I'm about kingdom things through you. And in that, I'm going to just move to the kind of the end of this chapter 65. I'm going to go to verse 20. But it's God responding and God talking about God's vision of bringing the kingdom here to earth. And we know through the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth here as it is in heaven, that we are co-laboring, right? Christ in us is awakening our imagination and our vision and our intercession and our prayer and our delighting in God in the ways that we in intimate places, intimate spaces, and great places, great spaces, co-labor with God unto this end. No longer will babies die when they are only a few days old. No longer will adults die before they have had a full life. This existentially rich, this vision of an existentially rich, meaningful life. Life is meant to have purpose. This abundance of life in fellowship with God. This nurturing and creating and establishing. No longer will people be considered old at 100, exclamation mark. Only sinners will die that young. Those who have chosen, this is not that behavioral kind of black and white, mean-spirited understanding of sinners. It's those that really work in a way that is cruel and crushes human life. In those days, people will live in the houses they build. This is an image that the fruit of human lives will not be serving others, solely serving others, where lives are spent on behalf of others. This is so much of God's heartbreak in the Old Testament, is that the children that were called to establish a vision of God's goodness lived and had people serving their ends in a way that God was jealous for those lives. God was jealous for the lives that Israel was having in servitude, right? Enslaved to them. This was an issue. This is an issue behind the book of Isaiah. That God was jealous for those lives to eat of their own making, their own hands. That's the image in Scripture. In those days, people will live in the houses they build and eat the fruit of their own vineyards. Their life will not be, if you will, squandered on behalf of the privileged who exact servitude from them. This is a lot of what God's fighting. It will not be like the past when invaders took the houses and confiscated the vineyards. And so in this story of Isaiah, at the beginning, Isaiah is saying, I set your servants, I'm going to the book of Jeremiah there, but God is wanting righteousness. God is wanting righteousness in the treatment of fellow humans, and they don't give it. And then he's likening that here with Babylon's invasion. It will not be like the past when invaders took the houses and confiscated the vineyards, for my people will live as long as trees and will have time to enjoy their own hard-won gains. That God sees our life creative in a way that's engaged and purpose-filled and rich, and there's goodness that flows from that. And that might be encouraged today, that you and I are inheritors. It just goes on. They will not work in vain, and this working in vain, I'm going to keep going. And their children will not be doomed to misfortune, for they are people blessed by Yahweh. And you and I are a part of this imagination of Yahweh. Christ in us, that hope of glory. We're part of this joy-filled imagining. And in my mind, I have Dorca. Dorca is a woman that made gifts for the women around her in a humble situation. And Peter's called there and he sees it and he brings her to life. He brings this woman in a culture that could just take, it could just take the gifts women give. But Peter sees the kingdom in the gifts of Dorca, the kingdom of her giving. It's a not taking how people give, not taking it for granted. And for you and I to feel that as we give, the kingdom comes through our giving. And some of us give in intimate and immediate ways. Here, let me make you some soup. Here, let me grow you some perfect vegetable and fruit, in my garden. Here, let me share the wholeness of my life in Thanksgiving with you. Let me do that. And some of us are in a season of God calling and imagining, growing our imagination of ways to grow more goodness on this earth, that people's children are not subject to misfortune. Some of us are about big vision, and some of us are a mixture, but there's this echo of God's goodness and rightness throughout the land. God's speaking to us and purposing through us a greater reality, a greater vision of God's goodness at work here, this side of Christ's return. And I want to just encourage you. I want to encourage you of what the songs God's singing over your life, and the songs God's singing over your children's life, and the way that the song God's singing in you and into fruitfulness for others, and moving and growing the opportunity of fruitfulness in other people's lives. And that I believe that verse I just read it, where folk that never before have called upon the name of Yahweh are doing so. And he's saying, I'm here. And he's leading them, encouraging them. I just think it's an amazing time in the midst of great disorder and chaos, of human lives imagining and influencing thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Be encouraged, be blessed.